In Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, badges serve the role of equipment. They grant new moves, increasing stats, helpful statuses. There is a lot to digest. And the more you play, the more you find, you get a feel for what badges are really good and which ones aren't. Naturally, a badge being considered overrated is going to be a divisive opinion. The badges are popular for a reason. I'm not going to try and tell you the badges on this list are bad or that you shouldn't use them. And a prime example of exactly that is Quick Change. This badge costs 7 BP, and it allows partners to be swapped for another without using up a turn. It's an extremely powerful badge, and it isn't hard to see why. If you struggle with planning, or you're a more casual player, it's incredible, as you're able to adapt on the fly, and basically always have the best partner for any situation. Partners being downed is also less of a concern, as if one falls, you can swap to another with no drawbacks in battle, and keep going as if nothing really happened. And if you're crafty enough, you can use Quick Change to permanently preserve advantageous statuses like Huge, Power Lift, or pair of partners with Mega Rush P. It's fairly well understood why this badge is as beloved as it is, and yeah, I'll agree that it's a good badge. However, I consider it fairly overrated for several reasons. TTYD isn't a hard enough game where I ever feel like Quick Change's effect is ever necessary. You have the necessary tools to thrive in TTYD without being able to switch for free, and despite the potential variety 7-hole partners with their own moves can afford, most of them can manage fine as your only partner, and even their extra HP is often entirely unnecessary. It becomes a question of how much switching do you really need to win? Quick Change, given that, feels more like a crutch badge you'd use to cheese the game's difficulty as opposed to any type of planned assault, as you can reliably win against bosses by knowing what they're capable of and coordinating your plan of attack to counter theirs. And if the name of the game is regular enemies, you can just run away, swap to the partner you want to fight with, and free up your BP for something else that would actually serve to help you. Really, the sooner you can learn to play without Quick Change, the better a player you'll be. While Quick Change is a badge where the love it gets makes at least some sense if you don't mind the BP cost, Quick Hammer reads to me as much less justifiable. For 2 BP, Mario slams this hammer onto the ground to hit enemies with a piercing quick attack for 2 damage before attack bonuses. This attack also flips certain enemies. I get the appeal of this move. Mario can hit all enemies on the ground, and it does have its place against foes like the Koopanator in Chapter 3. But really, that's the extent of what value this move really offers. Otherwise, this badge is just mediocre. I think my biggest problem with this badge is just that I typically try to ignore regular enemy fights, and so badges geared towards regular enemies are typically not very good to me. And Quick Hammer's unimpressive damage and the lack of ceiling enemies make this badge largely outclassed by multi-bounce, which while it doesn't pierce defense, it does scale with Mario's boots, and is capable of hitting just about anything you'd want thanks to ceiling targets being so scarce except in the Pit of 100 Trials. They're non-existent. Even the enemies in the pit that you would consider using Quick Hammer on, like Dark Koopa Trolls, can be dealt with by the combination of jumping and Spike Shield. And even that option is outclassed by simply going for Showstopper, a move with a near guaranteed 95% chance to OKO at max power. Meanwhile, this move has almost no strategic value for bosses. You're not going to use this move for Lord Crump when the X-Knots are on the ceiling, since it can't OKO without heavy attack investment, and Vivian's Fiery Jinx is strictly better. And Smorg's Miasmas are equally weak to multi-bounce thanks to the Ultra Boots, and Quick Hammer's damage not scaling to his current hammer. Unlike Fire Drive, which at least has a valuable niche, Quick Hammer just can't hack it. This next badge is a little harder to explain. Flower Saver reduces the FP cost of Mario's moves by 1 for 4 BP. There's also a partner variant, but I'm sparing it from this list. Back in the day, the Flower Savers would be considered near essential, but nowadays, I just don't find much appeal in them outside of challenge runs where your FP is locked to 5. At least Flower Saver P allows you to fight with the several partner attacks that normally cost 6. Granted, I consider both variants overrated, but unlike Flower Saver P, which at least has genuine merit if your FP is high and you depend on moves like Bomb Bass and Fiery Jinx, Mario's moves on average cost relatively little, and you're likely going to be dependent on Power Bounce, which costs a measly 3 FP per use. You're honestly better off just relying on gradual Sarah syrups to keep your FP up, which is especially effective if you're double dipping them. It isn't like Flower Saver helps with charge, since that move costs only 1 FP, and you're likely planning on using Power Bounce only once in an effort to wipe the boss out once you're done setting up. Now, I'm sure some of you will want to bring up Flower Saver synergy with FP Drain, which enables some moves to become effectively free, and while it's neat that you can do that, it's in practice just a really gimmicky tactic, and so we're on the same page. I don't consider using multi-bounce with Danger Mario a point in its favor. You wouldn't need Flower Saver then when Flower Finder is cheaper, and well, I have a lot of thoughts on Danger Mario that you can expect to hear later on. A badge that was actually almost featured on my 10 worst badges list, but I decided against it at the last minute. Let's talk about Lucky Start. It's a 4 BP badge that randomly grants Mario HP regen, FP regen, electrified, or dodgy status at the start of a battle. There's a lot working against this one. Obviously, this badge is near useless for bosses, even casually. Odds are your starting fight's fully healed, and if you do, HP and FP regen give you strictly less value than the dedicated HP and FP plus badges that also cost less BP to equip. This is because of the 3 turns granted as the battle starts, one of those turns elapses before the first turn elapses, giving you effectively only 2 turns of whatever status is chosen. Meanwhile, you wouldn't use Lucky Start for Electrified when Zap Tap is 1 BP cheaper and lasts permanently, and Dodgy is just worse than what the Lucky badges give you considering its turn duration is so short. 2 mediocre effects alongside 2 bad ones is super unappealing, especially for 4 BP. I've actually seen some people in my comments defend these effects for regular battles, the HP and FP regen specifically, when I was talking about buffing bad TTYD badges by claiming that Lucky Start helps to keep their stats topped off. Now this may come down to us looking at the game differently, but I find banking on 1 in 4 odds for the status you want to be a sign of poor filler. I'd rather just dedicate the extra time to Sweet Treat and run away at that point, even if it takes longer to do. After all, if you're patient enough and you want it enough, you're going to do it, and you can't in good faith hear someone else's patience. Don't get me wrong, it is an option, and I'm sure you can still see good results out of Lucky Start, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And it's not an option I defend, since I tend to prefer consistency over probability, with a few exceptions. You're getting a 2-for-1 deal here. Both versions of Charge, in my opinion, are well deserving of a spot on this list. For 1 FP, they increase the damage of the respective user by +2 attack. This is the premier strategy more casual players will opt for, where they charge a bunch, power bounce or ground pound, and drop the boss in a single move. Now, does this strategy work? Yes, and Charge does have strategic uses against bosses like Machu Grubba, where there are times where you want to attack but can't reliably do so. However, I don't like these badges for several reasons. First of all, the number of turns needed to build up enough damage to actually KO bosses outright is often more than for strategies tailored around bosses actually damaging you and building around that. So you'll often have to survive longer by relying on Charge as your win condition as opposed to the rush badges. Secondly, you'd naturally have to be at a higher level to actually survive for long enough to get a lethal attack off, meaning a higher HP stat is necessary unless you're planning to super guard as much as possible. So unless you do so and make your choices for badges largely arbitrary, you'll always need to either invest in more level ups or more items than what should be necessary to make Charge work. And thirdly, the fact it lasts for only 1 attack means that you do more damage per turn on average if you just relied on any other method of boosting attack that works for multiple attacks and just attacked repeatedly. And that's a tactic that works on almost any boss in the game between options like Power Lift, Power Punch, your rush badges, even Merly. This isn't even getting into the fact that Charge was actively nerfed by both multi-bonk and power bounce becoming harder to reap their full rewards, with the 4 hits becoming frame perfect. So compared to GameCube, you have to charge for more turns now to hit the same KO thresholds that used to be all but assured. Charge still has its place for players who don't know what to expect, but like Quick Change, I think the sooner you learn to not lean solely on it, the better a player you'll be at the game. Ice Power is a very specialized badge. It increases the damage Mario deals to fiery enemies by 1, reduces damage taken by fire attacks by 1, and protects against being burned. It really only exists for 3 enemies and a couple of boss attacks that do involve fiery damage. It does what it's supposed to do just fine, but I see this badge often ranks really high when other people are discussing badges on the internet, and I don't really see the appeal. Yeah, you'll equip it once you get it, but not nearly enough enough enemies actually exist where I think of it after Chapter 5. Pit of 100 Trials notwithstanding, I'm either going to mow everything down with Yoshi's Stampede or using Showstopper, and fiery enemies only exist during the 40s and 70s anyway. Reducing fire damage from the likes of Grottus and Bowser also just falls into that sort of neat but not really practical category, and the protection from burns is a moot point since you can't be burned at all as long as you hit your guards. With how few situations even exist where this badge would have an effect at all, this reads more like an E tier badge than anything B or especially A. You ever saw that worst 10 TTYD badges video made on the Players Beyond YouTube channel around a decade ago? The person behind that list actually placed All or Nothing at 9th worst because of some.
Therefore, it's unbalancing the strategic advantages of your attack choices, and as such, you might as well go ahead and equip Jumpman while you're at it.
Admittedly comical reasons. But he may have been ahead of his time concerning how All or Nothing in the remake is actually kinda lackluster. It increases Mario's attack power by 1 for 4 BP, but makes his attacks do 0 damage if you feel the action command. Back on GameCube, this was just a strictly cheaper power plus, since action commands were in general just easy enough to consistently hit without any added leniency. It was unfortunate that you'd only find it in Chapter 8's Palace of Shadow, but most like P up D down P, it's a great badge once you did get it. Now, I don't know the consensus behind All or Nothing in the Switch remake, but this badge was nerfed in a pretty big way. It's no longer a near automatic addition to your equips because power bounce is no longer a badge you can reliably use for more than 4 bounces. Still a decent chunk of carnage, but with All or Nothing, you're risking only 3 damaging bounces, which would make power bounce much less powerful on average. So it really isn't a great badge to use for bosses if your strategy involves power bounce. It's still good in the pit alongside multi-bounce, but I have a feeling there's a certain exploit in TTYD that you'd claim renders All or Nothing obsolete. So let's talk about it! I was for the longest time undecided on whether I should feature Spike Shield on this list, but seeing how it's heralded as amongst the best badges in the game, okay, yeah, let's talk about it. And also multi-bounce, since these two badges are essentially married to each other. But first, I want to give a thank you to my channel members, QuakeWave13, MB Switchy, and Nintendo Sixty-Jorts. So thank you. Now, let's talk about Spike Shield and the other badge. Spike Shield allows Mario to safely jump on and approach spiky targets like piranha plants and bristles. It's got good synergy with multi-bounce, a badge that for 1 BP and 2 FP enables Mario to jump once on all enemies in a row, and together, they will naturally be super useful throughout the Pit of 100 Trials. This is an attractive niche when spiky enemies are as plentiful as they are. However, in the context of what I would prioritize as a challenge runner, these badges are niche at best. Yes, I am aware that you really can't argue with splurging power rushes when the name of the game is power and you want to wipe everything out in one move. But that reads much more like an argument for how absurdly strong power rushes are in excess as opposed to multi-bounce and Spike Shield's usefulness. And in the context of challenge running, going out of your way to farm badges is seen as taboo, since it undermines any need to judge badges critically. Not just power rushes either. Charged, Flower Saver, P down D up, just about anything that gains an increased effect with multiple copies equipped that you can collect more than was guaranteed to be encountered just playing normally. And there's an exploit that's always overkill with how powerful Mario already is, even without badge farming. Now, depending on what you prioritize, you may disagree with me here. That's fine. You play the game the way you want to, but I personally can't find it in me to respect the usage of the Pianta Parlor for farming power rushes with how I view the game. And here's the rub. If you divorce, for example, Spike Shield from Danger Mario, it's actually a pretty poor badge in its own right, as anything spiky in nature tends to crumble much more quickly to Mario's special moves, especially Showstopper, which is a near guaranteed 1-hit KO against Dark Craw and Dark Koopa Trolls, and everything else just gets ripped to shreds by Koop's Shell Slam or Yoshi's Stampede, thanks to all the power boosting methods you naturally obtain. Not helped either that the only boss with spiky targets that Mario can be hurt by without Spike Shield is Cortez. Likewise, multi-bounce being your cheapest AoE option is good, but its value is rarely ever felt in challenge runs, even against bosses where it does have somewhat of a niche like Grottus and Smorg, and you'd need to give it a ton of support for it to actually be capable of doing anything worthwhile in the pit. Obviously, you're not going to consider these badges in a vacuum, and so Spike Shield and Multi-Balance are going to see plenty of use, but I'm sorry, to call them S tier badges that you always use once they're available is in my belief asinine, and we should instead acknowledge how game-breaking the Power Rush badges are with how they can be freely bought. Now these are badges I consider to be overrated, but what about the badges I deem to be the true best badges in the game? Well, click and watch the video on the screen now, and you'll get an idea of what I consider to be the best badges in all of TTYD. And once you do, let me know what your 10 best badges in the game are. I'm curious to hear what you think.